Mike Benning makes his explosive return when the US president comes under attack. Secret Service agents open fire in a frenzy while enemy drones detonate in midair. A massive swarm of suicide drones strikes without warning, turning the sky into a wall of flames. Earlier that same day, the president had simply wanted a peaceful fishing trip by the lake, surrounded by tight security. But just as everything was set, a group of terrorists quietly slipped through the forest nearby. After calculating the distance, they launched their drones. In an instant, countless drones swarmed in like a cloud of locusts. Sensing danger, Mike turned around and was stunned to see a massive, pitch-black wave of UAVs rushing toward them. US troops reacted immediately, and the security team fired back at the incoming drones. But they were simply too fast. Flying at low altitude in tight formation, the drones unleashed precise explosive attacks, overwhelming the defense line. One explosion after another echoed through the forest as the guards fell one by one. The situation grew increasingly dire. Mike fought back as hard as he could, firing non-stop. But something strange caught his attention. Whenever a drone locked onto him, it suddenly veered away and ignored him completely. Instead, the swarm targeted the president's small fishing boat. In the split second before impact, agents shoved the president into the water, narrowly avoiding the direct hit. The drones exploded against the boat, engulfing the lakefront in flames and wiping out the remaining guards. Seeing this, Mike immediately dove into the water to help the president escape. But the terrorists' true target was clear: the president. As soon as the two resurfaced, the drones found them again, forcing both men to dive underwater once more. Although they had successfully escaped the explosion, by the time US forces arrived, both men were badly injured, unconscious, and rushed into emergency care. News of the president being attacked spread across the entire country within minutes. The FBI immediately launched an emergency investigation, sealing off the entire lake area and combing through every detail of the crime scene. Not long after, several agents discovered a vehicle packed with electronic equipment about 2 kilometers away. It appeared to be the launch site for the drones. Around the same time, Mike slowly regained consciousness after his coma. As he painfully opened his eyes, he was shocked to find his hands cuffed. FBI agent Helen had already arrived at the hospital to question him. Out of the 30 security officers present during the attack, Mike was the only survivor. Worse yet, investigators found traces of his DNA inside the terrorist's vehicle, and $10 million had suddenly appeared in his foreign bank account. Listening to Helen's accusations, Mike was completely bewildered. He desperately insisted on meeting the president to explain that someone was framing him. But the agents refused to give him any chance to defend himself. They directly labeled him the prime suspect. At that moment, Mike was completely shattered. He had been the president's most trusted bodyguard, the Secret Service's top operative who had risked his life countless times. Yet now, he was being so easily branded a traitor. Not only did he have to endure the suspicion of his own comrades, but he also had to find a way to clear his name. Soon after, under police escort, Mike was placed in a transport vehicle to be taken into custody. But on the way, the terrorists launched another attack, quietly tailing the convoy from behind. Using advanced hacking technology, they took control of the police vehicle's electrical systems. All 3 engines suddenly shut down, immediately alerting the officers. Then out of nowhere, a car rammed into the convoy from the side. Before anyone could react, several armed terrorists with A-15 rifles opened fire on the police. Mike panicked and tried to fight back, but his hands were cuffed tightly, leaving him completely immobilized. Moments later, the terrorists approached the vehicle, planted an explosive device, cut off Mike's handcuffs, and dragged him out. Nearby in the woods, another terrorist had already dug a shallow grave, clearly planning to pin the entire assassination plot on Mike. Refusing to give in, Mike fought back with everything he had. This was his only chance. He was the only one who could still save the president. During the struggle, the vehicle suddenly slammed into a tree. Fortunately, Mike was seated in the back, so he survived without injury. The terrorists around him were quickly taken down one by one. To escape as fast as possible, Mike quickly disassembled the rifle and used its parts to unlock both his hand and leg restraints. He then pulled off the terrorist's mask, hoping to identify who he was dealing with. But to his shock, the face underneath was someone he had met before. It turned out that just a month earlier, Mike's close friend, Wade, had opened a private mercenary training center, hoping to make a huge profit. However, after the infamous 2007 incident, when contractors from Blackwater International, a well-known U.S. private military company, opened fire on civilians during the Iraq War, the whole world heavily criticized such organizations. Because of the massive backlash, Wade's facility lost all government contracts. Desperate, Wade had begged Mike to ask the president for help in reviving his business. But the newly elected president absolutely despised private military companies. Not only did they damage America's reputation, but in peaceful times, they were completely unnecessary. Mike was furious. He couldn't understand why his own friend would betray him. Was it really because Mike refused to convince the president to help him? Shaken and heartbroken, Mike grabbed a weapon and fled the scene. Meanwhile, the FBI quickly received reports of the police convoy being attacked. Officers were found dead, and Mike had vanished without a trace. Even worse, upon reviewing his bank accounts, investigators discovered that the mysterious $10 million deposited into Mike's account had come directly from a Russian state-owned bank. Because of this, the attack was now suspected to be orchestrated by Russia. Agent Helen immediately issued an emergency order. Mike must be brought to justice at any cost. At the same time, the mercenary leader learned that Mike had escaped, so he, too, sent his men out to hunt him down. Now Mike was completely alone, chased by the government from the front and hunted by terrorists from behind. The only thing waiting for him seemed to be a dead end. Mike stopped at a gas station and called his wife, telling her not to leave the house under any circumstances. He knew the call was being monitored, so he also used the chance to inform the FBI once again that he had been framed and that the terrorists were still planning to assassinate the president. But right at that moment, a local militia member suddenly pointed a gun at him from behind. With another man closing in, Mike was completely cornered. Yet in the next split second, he spun around and took both of them down with swift precision. He then stole a nearby truck and sped away. But he didn't get far. Using his phone's GPS signal, the FBI quickly tracked him down. Patrol cars swarmed in, chasing the truck at full speed. Seeing the police blocking the road ahead, Mike swerved hard, sending the truck's cargo container flying off the back, finally shaking off the patrol cars. He stepped on the gas again, trying desperately to escape, but military helicopters were quickly deployed to chase him down. At this moment, Mike was facing the full force of an entire nation. Moments ago he was the president's most trusted guardian, the angel protecting him. Now he was being hunted like a criminal. And that's exactly why the movie is titled Angel Has Fallen. Mike pushed the truck to its limit, but when he hit a sharp turn, the vehicle slammed through a roadside barrier and was launched off the road. Police cars and helicopters were closing in fast, but luckily Mike survived with only minor injuries. Exhausted and bleeding, he dragged himself into the nearby forest. Meanwhile, the FBI's suspicion toward him grew even stronger. So here's a question: if you were in Mike's situation, how would you even defend yourself? At the same time, news about Mike's bank account, supposedly linked to funds from Russia, reached the vice president. Even though experts suggested terrorists could have hacked the financial trail, making Russia's involvement uncertain, the vice president didn't hesitate. He immediately pushed for retaliation against Russia and announced that the US would resume cooperation with private military contractors, demanding that Russia pay the price. Deep in the forest, Mike kept moving until he sensed someone behind him. It was an elderly man holding a Blazer or 93 hunting rifle. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were steady and sharp, and that man was Mike's father. Ever since returning from the Vietnam War, he had suffered from severe PTSD. He isolated himself deep in the forest, refusing to meet anyone. Even Mike's wife had never seen him before. That's why coming to his father was Mike's final, desperate option, his only place left to rely on. But the mercenary group wasn't far behind. By checking Mike's computer history, they quickly traced a location. Using his social security number, they discovered this cabin had been receiving veteran disability benefits for years. Once confirmed, the mercenaries immediately deployed a strike team. Fortunately, Mike's father had spotted them through his surveillance cameras. Seeing how many enemies were approaching, Mike tried to pull his father away so they could escape, but the old man lifted a wooden floor panel, revealing a long underground tunnel. Mike was stunned. They crawled through the tunnel and emerged outside the cabin. Mike was ready to ambush the mercenaries from behind when a massive explosion erupted. The attackers heard the blast and rushed toward them, but they had no idea the entire mountain was rigged with his father's homemade explosives. Even hundreds of mercenaries wouldn't stand a chance. After finally taking down all the enemies, Mike brought the bodies into the wooden cabin. He knew the FBI would definitely come to investigate, so he needed to use these corpses to prove his innocence. Immediately afterward, Mike quickly took his father and left. While driving away, he intentionally revealed the cabin's location in the forest to the police through the surveillance cameras. Seeing this, the FBI urgently launched an investigation. Unexpectedly, after identifying the bodies, they discovered that all of these men belonged to a private military company under the mercenary group run by Mike's friend, W. The situation instantly became complicated. The FBI also realized something was not right. Agent Helen immediately decided to investigate this private military group, but no one knew that a new danger was about to strike. Meanwhile, the president, who was still in a coma, finally showed signs of waking up. This should have been good news, but when Mike heard about it, his mind was thrown into chaos. Because once the terrorists learned the president had regained consciousness, they would certainly attack the hospital again. Therefore, Mike had to stop the terrorists while also dealing with the police who were hunting him. On top of that, he worried about the safety of his wife and child. But in the end, Mike still chose to protect the president and decisively set out to rescue him. The old man, after giving Mike one last look, also quietly made a decision in his heart. At the same time, the mercenary leader W received a phone call. Just as Mike had predicted, the caller once again ordered them to kill the president. Shockingly, the mastermind behind the entire attack turned out to be none other than the vice president in the White House. He sought the highest position and wanted to provoke a war with Russia, triggering a global conflict. Soon after, Wayne and his men prepared to take action. However, the FBI team led by Helen arrived at their base right at that moment to investigate. But before they could even speak, W immediately drew his gun and opened fire. Under the burst from his Glock 17, Helen and her colleague were killed on the spot, and a terrifying crisis was about to unfold. The terrorists then launched their operation. They armed themselves and quickly moved toward the hospital. Mike, at this moment, had already arrived ahead of them. Despite the area being filled with police officers, entering the hospital was as easy as drinking water for someone who used to be the president's personal bodyguard. Mike changed into a police uniform and radioed that a shooter had been spotted on the first floor. All the officers who received the message rushed downstairs, and Mike used the moment they shifted direction to slip past them and enter the hospital undetected. It must be said that Mike became the president's top bodyguard solely due to his extraordinary skills. Even under immense pressure from being framed and hunted, he remained calm and rational. Every move he made showed the professionalism of an elite operative. Right after that, Mike headed down to the basement, where only one security guard remained. Holding his HKP-30, Mike subdued the guard and prepared to head to the president's floor. As soon as the elevator doors opened, all the security personnel immediately pointed their guns at him. The scene descended into chaos, and Mike yelled out his friend's name. When he saw his African-American friend David, Mike finally dropped his weapon, chose to surrender, and urgently warned them that the hospital was in grave danger. He needed to meet the president right away. At that moment, the president, realizing that Mike had arrived, ignored everyone's objections and immediately ordered his staff to bring Mike in. The two had shared a close relationship for many years, and of course the president knew Mike wasn't the enemy. Mike also understood the situation clearly. He stated directly that they needed to evacuate immediately and that the identities of the terrorists had already been confirmed. Amid the heated argument between the two sides, the president shouted loudly, ordering them to remove Mike's handcuffs and let him take over all command operations. With the situation growing increasingly urgent, Mike quickly assigned tasks, requesting Marine One to evacuate the president as fast as possible. In addition, all security forces in the hospital needed to be repositioned. Meanwhile, the terrorists were getting close. The situation grew more dangerous by the second. Everyone had no choice but to wait for the helicopter to arrive. But right at that moment, the oxygen supply line in the hospital room suddenly began leaking uncontrollably. Medical staff rushed to check the issue, only to discover that the entire gas system had been hacked. The terrorists intended to blow up the entire hospital. In that instant, everyone was overwhelmed with terror. The security team rushed to evacuate the president, and the entire hospital descended into panic. But just as the security convoy managed to drive the president out of the hospital, the terrorists arrived. Their leader, Wayne, armed with an AM-308 MWS automatic rifle, immediately opened fire on the security personnel. David, the black Secret Service agent, tried to call for backup, but communications had already been jammed by the enemy. Seeing the situation turn dire, Mike quickly led the president to escape. Thanks to the security team's protection, the president narrowly survived and managed to take shelter in a nearby building. At that exact moment, the oxygen pipeline rigged by the terrorists reached its detonation point. With a deafening explosion, the hospital erupted into a massive pillar of smoke. And when US reinforcements finally arrived, the terrorists opened fire instantly, wiping them out in seconds. The situation had become extremely critical. To ensure the president's safety, Mike handed an M4 rifle to David and armed himself with a handgun, preparing to go outside and hold off the attackers. Moments later, the terrorists stormed the building, while Mike had already moved down to the lower level to flank them from behind. He hid at the stairwell corner, stunned an approaching enemy, quickly grabbed a ballistic vest, and launched into action. But the terrorists were too many. Mike immediately threw an M18 smoke grenade to disrupt their visibility. Using the cover, he crouched behind a barrier, picked up an M67 fragmentation grenade, and hurled it at them. With a violent explosion, several terrorists were blown away instantly. And emotional storytelling. At the front line, W and his mercenaries lies in its craft, security team's but the value of a review lies in the viewer's experience. One terrorist carrying an M4 with a grenade launcher attachment fired a shot that instantly took down a security officer. Drop a comment below. They stormed room after room, convinced the president was just within reach. But when they finally opened the last door, the room was empty. Enraged, W believed Mike had tricked him yet again, unaware that the president was actually hiding behind a bookshelf, a clever setup arranged by Mike. Just then, American reinforcements finally arrived, capturing the terrorists one by one. Realizing the situation was collapsing, W attempted to escape, but Mike continued to chase him. Suddenly, an enemy helicopter appeared overhead, and a sniper armed with the upgraded X-338 rifle opened precise fire on Mike. Compared to the AWSM, this sniper rifle had a longer and heavier barrel, capable of maintaining deadly accuracy at distances up to 1,500 meters. Under the enemy's overwhelming gunfire, Mike fired back desperately and managed to escape. But just as he reached the stairwell, an M23 defensive grenade was thrown down from above. The violent explosion sent Mike crashing to the ground, severely injured. Meanwhile, W and the terrorists quickly boarded their aircraft to flee. Suddenly, a grenade launched by Mike exploded beneath them. At that moment, W knew everything was over. Facing his former comrade, the two men engaged in a fierce struggle. They were once elite soldiers who had fought side by side through life and death missions. But in the end, thanks to the hero's resolve, Mike overpowered W and ended his life with a single stab. The crisis was finally resolved. In the final moments of the film, the government cleared all charges against Mike. After a thorough FBI investigation, the corrupt vice president was arrested, likely facing a death sentence for his crimes. Mike's father, too, found peace with his family. When Mike rushed to save the president at the hospital, his father finally understood his son's dedication. So when terrorists broke into Mike's home to kidnap his wife and daughter, the old man stepped up and effortlessly took them down. Angel Has Fallen delivers intense, gritty action centered on betrayal, honor, and redemption. The film creates a relentless chase as Mike becomes the victim of a sophisticated political trap, highlighted by terrifying drone attacks. What truly elevates the movie is Mike's emotional depth and the touching bond with his veteran father, emphasizing that personal courage and loyalty are a hero's final weapons.